man collapsed onto the cold garage floor after a sleepless night. A woman, running from the weight of her last name, just happened to be there in that moment. They didn't fix each other, but they began rebuilding their broken lives at the same table. And in that moment, the quietest kind of miracle was born. True love sometimes begins with nothing more than a call for help. If this story made your heart ache in the best way, don't forget to like the video and subscribe for more. As the streetlights flickered, raindrops driven by the wind hit the asphalt like they were scratching it. The town's streets had been empty all day, but once night fell, the silence felt different. It was as if time had stopped. Everyone had retreated into their homes, and only the wind was left to speak. That night, even though it seemed like everything started with just an old car breaking down, fate was actually reopening the door to a much older debt. The clock inside the garage showed 1 in the morning. Julian Becker, in his 30s, was a mechanic whose hands carried the grime of many years. His dark hair clung to his forehead, and the bags under his eyes were purple from exhaustion. But still, he couldn't bring himself to close the garage, because the gray sedan in front of him belonged to an elderly customer. That car was the only way she could get to work in the morning. Julian had never learned to say no, because no one had ever said yes to him when he needed it. As he tightened the last bolt, the pain in his joints became unbearable. His vision blurred for a moment. Just then, the old phone hanging on the wall started ringing. Late-night calls were either accidents or emergencies. Julian hesitated, then finally reached for the phone. "Becker's garage," he said, his voice low but firm. On the other end, a young woman's voice came through, filled with panic and uncertainty. "My car broke down. I'm up the back road, lost in the fog. My phone's about to die. I didn't know who else to call." Julian lowered his head. Like any small town, this one held on to voices, especially voices that needed help. There was a pause. Then he sighed and said, "Stay where you are. I'm coming." After 3 tries, the coughing tow truck finally started. Julian sat behind the wheel without even grabbing a raincoat. Fog and rain blanketed the windshield. Nothing was visible beyond the weak corridor carved out by the headlights. 15 minutes later, the lights lit up a red sports car by the side of the road. Its hood was open, one headlight still worked, and someone stood in front of the car. The young woman's name was Amelia. Her trench coat had turned nearly transparent in the rain. She was shielding her purse with her hands and looked frozen in place. Julian stepped out and turned on his flashlight. "You the one who called?" he asked simply. Amelia nodded. "Yes. Thank you for coming. I think the battery's completely dead." Julian gave the car a quick look, then nodded. "Good guess. Needs a jump, but that won't do much in this weather. I'll tow you in." At first, she looked like she might protest, but then she gave in. While Julian hooked up the cables, his hand slipped, slicing his left thumb on a piece of metal, but he didn't react. Amelia remained silent, just watching carefully. Julian wasn't used to eyes watching him like that. When they got into the truck, the warmth inside fogged up the windows. Julian broke the silence. "Do you end up on roads like this a lot?" Amelia gave a faint laugh. "No. Usually, things go according to plan. But today was weird." Back at the garage, Julian pulled the car inside. While Amelia stood to the side, he started installing the new battery. Before he could even wipe his hands, a wave of dizziness hit him. His knees buckled. His last words came out as a whisper. "I'm done." Then everything went black. The sound of a tool hitting the ground echoed in the garage. As Amelia ran toward Julian in shock, the sound of the rain faded, replaced by the pounding echo of a heartbeat. Julian's eyelids felt as heavy as his body. The first thing that reached his awareness wasn't light or sound. It was a smell. That salty, antiseptic hospital scent. Then came the hum, the rhythmic beeping of a heart monitor. The only proof at that moment that he was still breathing. He struggled to open his eyes. The white fluorescent light on the ceiling looked blurry, but he instantly recognized the silhouette beside him. Curly hair, familiar features. Amelia. When he turned his head slightly, he saw her. Amelia was curled up on a hospital chair, sleeping. Her trench coat was draped over her shoulders like a blanket. One of her hands was holding onto Julian's blanket, as if she was afraid he might fall again if she let go. Julian wanted to speak, but his throat was dry. All that came out was a rough rasp. Even that was enough to wake Amelia. When her eyes opened, she stared blankly at first, then realized Julian was awake. Her breath caught. "You're awake." Thank God, she said, her voice trembling. Julian frowned. What happened? He asked, his voice barely audible. You passed out. I brought you to the hospital. The doctor said it was exhaustion and dehydration. You haven't eaten properly in days, Julian. Julian closed his eyes, ashamed. There was just work. Amelia shook her head gently. Don't you have anyone? Family? A close friend? Julian didn't respond. His eyes locked onto the ceiling. Silence settled between them like a blanket. Finally, Julian cleared his throat. Why? Are you still here? That question cracked something behind the expression on Amelia's face. She smiled, but there was something broken behind it. I didn't want to leave, she said. If you woke up and I wasn't here, it would have felt wrong. Julian lowered his head slightly. Thank you. Amelia stayed quiet for a moment. Then, as if she needed to release a weight off her chest, she suddenly spoke. I lied to you. Julian turned toward her, surprised, but he didn't react. Amelia continued. My last name is Hartman. Amelia Hartman. No one here knows me, but my father is the head of the Hartman Group. Corporations, properties, media. Our name doesn't just make headlines here, but in other places too. Julian held his breath. That name, the moment she said it, it rang in his mind. It was synonymous with luxury, power, and the untouchable elite. There was a massive gap between the woman in the light trench coat he saw that night in his garage and that title. So, Julian struggled to find the words. You came here by accident. No, Amelia said. I ran away. I was being forced into a marriage contract. My father had planned a corporate merger through me, without ever asking me, without asking anything. So I just grabbed the wheel and drove. I had no idea where I was going. Not until the car broke down. Julian covered his eyes with his hand. So I helped you by pure chance. And you just happened to be here. Amelia shook her head. No, it's not chance anymore. Because you helped. Without expecting anything. Without knowing who I was. Julian had spent his life encountering hardships, not opportunities. What this woman was saying didn't match the reality he knew. But at the same time, her voice. It was raw, bruised, and honest. There was no gloss of wealth on it. Just the heart of a tired woman in her eyes. A nurse walked in and interrupted the moment. He's getting better, but he should stay under observation for one more day, she said. He needs to rest. Amelia nodded slightly, then turned to Julian. Should I stay? She asked quietly. No one had ever asked him that before. He could only nod. That night, silence said more than words. And in Julian's life, someone didn't just arrive, maybe a revolution had. When Julian was discharged from the hospital, the sky was still gray, but the rain had stopped. It was as if the sky had chosen to stay quiet just like Julian. As Amelia drove him back to the garage, silence accompanied the journey. The radio was on, but the volume was low. The hum of the engine wasn't enough to drown out the confusion in his heart. When they reached the garage, Julian pulled out his key to unlock the door. Amelia stayed in the car for a moment, but when Julian turned toward her, she was still there. Do you want to come in? He asked after a brief hesitation. Amelia nodded. The two of them stepped inside together. The garage was quiet, like time had frozen. Everything was just as they had left it, unfinished tasks, dusty shelves, oil-stained floors. But something felt different. This time, Julian wasn't alone. Amelia handed him a thermos she had placed on the table. I stopped by Maggie's diner this morning. The woman there, should I say Maggie, had a lot to say about you. Julian chuckled softly. Yeah, Maggie's like a radio. Once it's on, it doesn't stop talking. Amelia glanced at him, but she only said good things. That you're helpful, reliable, a man of your word. Julian looked away. I'm just an ordinary guy, just doing my job. Amelia placed her hand gently on the thermos, quietly. There were other garages I could have called that night, but only yours answered. Maybe that wasn't just coincidence. Julian didn't respond, but something stirred inside him. He'd spent his whole life trying to matter to someone, and now someone had noticed him, and that was terrifying. That day, Amelia didn't leave. In fact, she spent the entire day helping Julian. At first, she just watched. Then she handed him a screwdriver. Then she held the hood open. Small, quiet gestures. Julian was surprised at first. Then he got used to it. By the end of the day, they were tired, but they were tired together. In the late afternoon, they sat in the old chairs for a tea break. Julian spoke slowly. I once dreamed of a different life too. I got into college. I was going to be an engineer. Then my mom got cancer. I dropped out. This garage was her last wish. That's why I'm here. Amelia lowered her head. My mom died when I was young too. My dad never really knew how to care for me. He only knew how to control. Growing up, love was a reward given only if you were perfect, taken away if you made mistakes. That's why when you helped me that night, without knowing who I was, that was impossible in my world. Julian looked straight at her. It was impossible for me too. But when I saw you there, in the rain, I just wanted to help. I didn't need to know who you were. There was a silent understanding in both their eyes now. A bond was forming, despite the wounds of the past. But even in that moment, Julian heard a voice inside him whisper, "This can't be real. She has to leave. This can't last." Suddenly, Amelia leaned forward slightly. "Julian, I want to stay here. For a while. Just to make my own choices." Julian could be heard swallowing hard. "Okay, but this town asks questions. Even I want to know more about you." Amelia looked straight into his eyes. "I'll let you ask." And that evening, for the first time in years, Julian cooked dinner not just to fill his stomach, but with the warm peace of waiting for someone. Outside, the streetlight blinked faintly. Inside, two hearts had begun to move toward each other in silence. Amelia had started to become a part of Julian's small world. Every morning, they shared coffee together, and then she'd help him out in the garage. She had picked up the basics, changing filters, checking engine oil, even organizing the spare parts shelves. At first, the townspeople were surprised, but soon, her warm smile softened dozens of assumptions. But Julian knew this peace wouldn't last forever, because Amelia wasn't running from her past. She had just found a temporary refuge, that was all. And refuges are left behind once the storm passes. That thought kept Julian awake at night. He started waking up with the fear that one morning, she just wouldn't be there anymore. And one morning, that fear almost came true. A luxury car with tinted windows pulled up in front of the garage. Two men in suits stepped out, their sunglasses, the earpieces in their ears. Every detail twisted Julian's stomach. Amelia turned pale the moment she saw them from the doorway. The men walked straight toward her. "Miss Hartman, the chairman is calling you back. We've given you enough time." Julian stepped forward. "Is there a problem?" One of the men turned to him. "It doesn't concern you. This is a private family matter." Amelia looked at Julian. "Wait for me," she whispered. Then she walked toward the car with the men. Julian didn't say a word. He just watched her leave. The knot in his throat was tighter than anything a wrench could fix. When Amelia returned to her father's mansion, the man sitting across from her wasn't just a father, he sat like an emperor. Hartman's voice was sharp as glass. "I didn't think you'd come back. But this little game ends here." Amelia clenched her fists. "It wasn't a game. You're going to live with a mechanic? That life isn't yours. You just had a moment of weakness." Amelia closed her eyes. "That life was the first time I ever felt like myself." Hartman slid papers across the table. "This marriage contract, this business merger, it's our future. Your feelings are not an option." That night, Amelia sat alone in her room. But she wasn't quiet like before. Julian's eyes, the way he told her to be yourself, wouldn't leave her mind. And in that moment, she made her decision. She would be silent no longer. The next morning, Julian was alone again in front of the garage. But something was missing: no thermos, no smile, no soft morning silence. He didn't fix a single thing that day, because what was broken inside him was more complicated than any engine. At sunset, a shadow fell across the garage door. Julian turned to see Amelia standing there. She held a bag in her hand, and there was determination in her eyes. Her clothes were no longer fancy, just a simple coat, plain jeans. And yet, she looked stronger than ever. "I turned my father down," she said directly. "The company, the deal, the marriage. I gave it all up, because I had to choose a life. And I chose you." Julian shook his head slowly. "Don't choose me, Amelia. I'm just a mechanic's son. I don't want you to ruin your dreams." Amelia stepped closer. "You're the first real decision I've ever made. I'm not running anymore. This time, I've come to stay." Julian's silence held 1,000 thoughts. Then, slowly, he walked toward her. "Do you know how hard this choice is going to be?" "Every second will be worth it," Amelia said. And in that moment, no matter how complicated the world outside the garage was, inside there was only one truth: a woman's choice, and a man daring to believe in something for the very first time. The garage was quiet that night, but the silence wasn't out of fear. It came from a peace that had finally been accepted. Julian stood with his hands in his pockets, staring at Amelia, who was standing tall in front of him. There was nothing left of the soaked, timid woman from the night they first met. Now, there was only clarity in her eyes. No hesitation, just certainty and maybe a hint of defiance. "If you don't believe me," Amelia said, her voice smooth but hiding a sting, "say so, and I'll leave. But don't pity me. I didn't make this decision for you, I made it for myself. For the first time in my life, I didn't do something for anyone else. I did it for the person I want to be." Julian's throat was dry. Whatever he said felt like it wasn't enough. No matter how honest he tried to be, the weight of everything he'd held inside seemed to cast a shadow on every word. Then suddenly, he remembered something his mother once said. "If you get scared when people start to love you, you'll never let them get close." He took a deep breath. Then softly, almost in a whisper, he said, "I don't want you to go." Those 5 words hung in the air. Amelia closed her eyes and took a breath as if she'd been holding it for hours. When she opened them again, she saw every wall on Julian's face melt away. Something broke inside her too, but this time, not with pain, with healing. That night, Julian showed her the small apartment behind the garage. It was old but clean. A bed, a tiny kitchen, a narrow window. The window didn't show the sky, just the roof of the garage. But when Amelia stepped inside, she looked around as if it were a palace. Because for the first time, she wasn't finding a place to run from, but a place to stay. They made breakfast together the next morning. The coffee was still bitter, but it tasted different when shared. As the day went on, Amelia organized the shelves, and Julian worked on engines. Their conversations developed quietly, with an unspoken rhythm. Even something as simple as brushing fingers while passing a wrench felt meaningful now. Every glance seemed to bring down another wall. That day, the town started to notice the change. Carol was the first to show up, the elderly shopkeeper who still acted like she was young. She peeked her head in. "Amelia, you're still here?" she asked, surprised but clearly pleased too. "Yes," Amelia said softly. "I'll be staying a while. Maybe longer." Carol stepped in. "That's lovely. We needed someone just like you around here." She handed her a small card. "There's a little cleanup event next week. We're restoring the old shops. If you want to help." Amelia took the card. A barely noticeable smile appeared on her lips. "I'd be happy to," she said. "Gladly." Julian watched the conversation in silence. But something was blooming inside him. Amelia was starting to become part of this town. And with her, he was starting to feel, maybe for the first time, what it meant to truly belong. That evening, when the garage closed, Julian invited her into town. "Maggie's place is probably still open this time of night," he said. "She makes the worst soup in the world, but the bread isn't bad." Amelia smiled. "Can we grab some tea on the way?" "Wouldn't be the same without it," Julian replied. The lights inside Maggie's diner were soft. A few older customers were deep in conversations that had probably gone on for years. Their presence gave the place a kind of warmth. Julian and Amelia sat at a corner table in the back. After placing their orders, Julian took a deep breath and spoke. "Amelia, I used to have a dream. One I forgot before you showed up. To grow this garage. To fix more than just cars, maybe even lives. To teach the younger ones, leave something behind. But I kept putting it off. Always said I didn't have time or the means." Amelia looked into his eyes. "Then don't put it off anymore," she said. "Because watching you taught me how to dream again." They sat in silence for a while, then signaled for the check. When they stepped outside, the air had gotten colder, but they carried the warmth from inside with them. As they walked down the street, Amelia suddenly stopped. Julian turned to see her gazing up at the sky. "If the moon is shining this bright," she said quietly, "it means something's changing." Julian smiled. "And sometimes, change is the most beautiful thing there is." At the end of the night, Julian turned to Amelia and said something simple but powerful enough to take root. "Tomorrow, I want to take you somewhere." "Where?" Amelia asked. "To a memory," Julian said. "A little bit of the past, and a little bit of hope." And with that, the night came to a close. But the next morning for both of them was the beginning of something entirely new. The next morning, Julian drove Amelia down an old road. As they made their way through a quiet forest path, the morning mist still clung to the branches. At the end of the road, they stopped in front of a small cabin, its moss-covered roof giving it a forgotten look. When Julian turned off the engine, only the birds could be heard. Amelia squinted at the building. "This place?" she asked. Julian stared out the window. "My mom's cabin. She used to spend her summers here before her illness got worse. It was her escape. She'd say, 'When the world gets too heavy, I come here to breathe.' I never got to join her. I was always working at the garage. But now, I wanted to bring someone. Someone who helps me breathe." Amelia lowered her head. That sentence hit her like a spear to the chest. So few people in her life had ever been this honest with her. They walked to the cabin together. Inside, there was still an old chair, a stove, and a bulletin board pinned with handwritten recipes in his mother's script. The dust felt more like a layer of memory than neglect. Julian stood in silence for a moment, then pulled an old envelope from his pocket. "I found this last week while cleaning out the garage attic. A letter from my mom to me. Never sent." He opened the envelope. One of the small cuts on his finger stung, but he didn't care. He began to read. "Dear Julian, if you're reading this, I probably haven't watched over you for a long time. But I want you to know I always prayed for you. Always thought of you. When you took over the garage, my heart could have burst. But I knew the things you'd fix wouldn't just be cars. You'd fix people too. You may think this town doesn't belong to you, but you are the roots of this town. One day, someone will come. Someone who will open you up and let you breathe again. Don't shut your heart to her. Because, my son, you still don't know how to be loved. But you can learn. And to be loved is to begin living." Julian's voice trembled. Amelia etched the words into her mind like they'd been carved into the cabin walls. Julian folded the letter and pressed it to his chest. "I couldn't bring myself to read those words before. But after you came, suddenly everything started to make sense." In that moment, Amelia saw something she never had before, a man showing his wound, not with power or pride, but with vulnerability and truth. "Julian," she said, voice breaking, "you know, I've always played a role. The successful daughter, the quiet heiress, the child who met every expectation. Then one day my car broke down, and all those roles slipped off me like a rain-soaked trench coat. With you, I became me. For the first time." Julian stepped beside her. "And if you stay with me, you can stay as yourself." They locked eyes, and in that moment, silence wasn't a wall, it was a bridge between them. The next day, the town held its spring festival in the main square. Julian and Amelia attended together. Amelia handed flower bouquets to the elderly, while Julian taught little kids how to fix bike tires. Maggie glanced over at the two and whispered to herself, "Those two just rebooted the whole town." At the end of the day, as the pastor was giving a speech on stage, Julian stepped forward in front of the crowd. He was nervous, but his voice was steady. "Standing here today, I remembered something my mom used to say. A life isn't just lived, it's built. This town, this garage, these people, they've been the foundation of my life. But now, I want to build that life with someone." The crowd quieted. Julian pulled out a small, simple box from his pocket. He looked at Amelia, standing at the side of the stage. She looked stunned, her eyes welling up, but she didn't move. "Amelia Hartman, I don't want to walk with you through ghosts of the past. I want to walk with you into the winds of the future. I can't promise luxury, but I can promise honesty, realness, and endless devotion. Will you stay with me?" Amelia walked forward silently. The crowd parted for her. In that moment, there were only two people in the world. It was so quiet. Her whispered, "Yes," felt like it echoed to the sky. Julian slid the ring on her finger. It wasn't diamond-studded or flashy, but it carried something far more valuable, a piece shaped by two hearts that had healed together with their own hands. Days passed, months, then seasons changed. But one thing remained, the life Julian and Amelia built. The old garage became more than just a repair shop. Young people learned skills there, mechanical and personal. Amelia began managing community support programs at the town hall. And every Sunday, they went to Miller's Lake together. They sat in silence, fingers intertwined, hearts speaking without words. One day, Julian hung a plaque on the garage wall. It read only 4 words, "A life from broken pieces." And in that small town, something happened. Something no one talked about much, but everyone felt. A miracle occurred. And this miracle didn't come from the stars, but from a mechanic soaked in rain, and a woman who shed her identity to finally find herself. Their story became a legend that gave others the courage to mend their own broken pieces. If this story touched your heart, reminded you of old wounds, or gave you new hope, Share it with us in the comments. This isn't just a love story, it's a story for anyone brave enough to begin again.